Hey everyone, and welcome to Ramblin' Reviews, where we analyze different types of media and/or their cultural relevance. My name's Christian, and this is The Amazing Spider-Man issue number 9. But before we get to that, we are going to take a look at Spider-Man in The Avengers issue number 3. This features an issue, or rather, a story entitled The Avengers Meet Submariner. Now, this was written by Stan Lee and illustrated by Jack Kirby. Now, we've seen Jack's work before, and it hasn't been the best, but we'll get to that in a minute here. The story here basically is the Avengers are looking for the Incredible Hulk, and they're going to a few different superheroes to ask them if they'll help them out. It's kind of a way, I think, to just kind of do crossovers and be like, oh, look at all these other characters Marvel has. A similar thing is done with the Amazing Spider-Man Annual 1, where he literally sees, like, Doctor Strange, Iron Man, Thor, like, all the big Marvel characters at the time, and it's like, all right, this isn't a coincidence. Obviously, this is blatant, like, marketing for your other characters, which, like, that's cool, but, I'm a little bit cynical about it. But in any case, we've seen Jack Kirby's work as Spider-Man before, and it's been pretty hit or miss. But, what the hell is this? Spider-Man's face looks so deformed here. If you told me this was like an edgy, like, adult comedy sketch kind of thing, like I don't know, something in like Family Guy or South Park, or, well, not South, he wouldn't look like this in South Park, but you get what I mean, or like, I don't know, like Robot Chicken or something, like Mad, whatever, like, I would believe that, but, like, what am I looking at here? This is insane. In any case, Iron Man, Spidey's one of the people that Iron Man goes to, and which he does so through some holographic projection thing. He's not really there, but in any case, Spidey is like, hey, what do I look like? The Hulk, chasing down, guy, whatever. Like, you'd think, this is like this ain't my bag. I got my own things, right? Why don't you try the Missing Persons Bureau? And, Iron Man's like, well, thanks for nothing, Anyway, that's our little cameo of Spidey in that. But moving on proper to The Amazing Spider-Man issue number 9. This features a story entitled The Man Called Electro, written, once again, of course, by Stan Lee and illustrated by Steve Ditko. Now, we open this story with Spidey really in a rush. We have, people are kind of commenting on how he's in such a rush. We have this moment where these cops are in a shootout with criminals they're trying to, arrest, and as Spidey's making his way through, they're like, oh, he'll help us, and the criminals immediately give up, and they're like, oh, we might as well give up now. But Spidey he's not even paying attention to them. However, because they gave up, they were able to get arrested. You have to have that nice little bow on the thing. You can't have them just, like, get away or take down the cops or anything like that, which a more kind of adult, edgier kind of thing would definitely go that route, but it's the route I would go, but, whatever. In any case, I like this shot here, this panel, because we have Peter mid getting home. Once again, it's night, even though it's blue, and to me, it looks like it's daytime, but it must be nighttime. I'm thinking, in any case, we have this moment where, so I can't say in broad daylight, but still while Spidey's on the street, just, yes, around his home, but not quite there yet, he's like putting on a jacket and changing back into his civilian clothes as Peter Parker, and he quickly makes his way into the, in his house and goes to see his Aunt May as he's tending to her while she's basically bedridden. Now, this might be a controversial take in the Spider-Man fan base. This is the first of many, 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 many instances of faking out and making it as if Aunt May is going to die. And I'm gonna be honest, I don't feel it so much here, but the more they overplay this trope, and especially as it later in the 2000s leads to the events of One More Day, I really wish they just killed her off. I wish they just pulled the trigger and just let her actually die, like they did in the Insomniac Spider-Man game. Like, I'm sorry, but constantly doing this fake out of Aunt May, and like I get it, she's important to Peter and everything, and like that's horrible, but like she's old, she's gonna die anyway. I don't know. I just I don't know. We'll talk to it more as these kind of issues come up later, but yeah, this is the first time it happens, and I really don't like it at all. What I do like is the attention to detail that we see Spidey's costume under his trench coat that he's wearing, because he was in such a hurry that he's not really hiding his costume that well. But I like that little attention to detail. But yeah, I really don't like this trope, and the more that it continues, the more I'm going to be like, just kill her, just do it, just stop with this shit, please. But in any case, we are now introduced to the villain of Electro, who has the ability to essentially charge him up like, with electricity, and is able to then throw those, I want to say lightning bolts, because I mean that's how they're drawn, but technically it's just electric charges in order to do electricity. I mean, the things that he does, he doesn't really hurt anybody with it, and I imagine that's because of the whole, Comics Code of Authority thing. But in any case, I do want to mention here, electricity is one of my favorite, if not my favorite, superpower. Like, it's my go-to answer if people are like, oh, if you could have a superpower, for me, it's electricity. But I don't really like Electro that much. We'll get to him later. He's very much like a C-list level villain at best, but we'll go through this as we continue, of course. So Electro makes his first heist, where he holds up what I assume is a bank car, although all the people are dressed basically the same way the cops are, if you ask me. So I'm not sure what it's supposed to be, but in any case, he holds them up and is able to take their bags of gold, which I guess was also a thing in the 60s. So, such a weird idea to think of having physical gold in bags transported, but it is what it is. He corrals them with this electric fence, but again, he's not actually using his electricity to actually, attack and hurt people or anything. Now, I'm not expecting him to kill people, especially in this type of, comic and everything. And I do want to point out, by the way, the term electrocute specifically refers to being killed with electricity. It's a combination of the word, electric and execution. So if somebody isn't actually killed with electricity, or they weren't electrocuted, they were just shocked. That's going to actually kind of become important later, as we'll get into it later here. Meanwhile, Peter is told by the doctor that Aunt May is only getting worse, and if things don't improve soon, she's going to have to go to the hospital. Now, I think it should, bear mention, of course, that this is going to cost a lot of money if she does have to go to the hospital, and we will actually get to that a little bit more in the future here. But there is a moment where, Aunt May, of course, is like, oh, but if I'm at the hospital, then who's going to take care of you? And, this is actually a really sweet moment. As much as I don't like this concept and how often this trope is done, this is a really sweet moment because I've been there. I've been there with my folks, where it's that kind of vibe of like, you're young and you're like, you can take care of yourself, but they still kind of see you as a kid. So they're like, well, who's going to take care of you? And it's like, it's really kind of sweet, because it's like, man, even though you're dealing with this, like, you're still thinking of me. Like, it's really sweet. It's a very like parental mindset that I've never experienced. Maybe some of you watching this have, but I really think it's one of those things that you can't really understand where Aunt May is coming from unless you yourself are a parent. So but I think I understand it well enough, and I do think it's sweet. But as Peter is still going about school and everything, he's laser focused on just making sure Aunt May is okay. And I get this, man, because like I had a moment, I had a period of time where my dad was basically deathly ill in the hospital, and I was working, and I had my own I had my own place and everything as I do now. But I worked, I went to the hospital, I went home, and I repeated this process over and over again throughout the majority of early 2020 as I was trying to take care of my dad and make sure that he was okay. So I've been there. I get it. I've been in Peter's shoes. I haven't been in Aunt May's shoes, but I have been in Peter's shoes, and I understand that concept. And as he is so laser focused, he's not thinking about anything, including his classmates. They're trying to talk to him, they're trying to everything, and Flash is even like, oh, maybe he's kind of sore about our fight because he wants to act like he won and everything. But as he tries to reach out to Peter, again, he's like just so laser focused, he's not paying attention. Well, Flash takes it as an insult, and he's like, oh, should have known. He's just so stuck up and everything, and all this stuff. And obviously that isn't the case at all, but it is the vibe that they get here. But although Peter's fellow classmates think he's just shafting them and he's kind of all alone in this, he shows up to the hospital again and finds Betty Brant there, ready to kind of just support him and be there for him with this, and be there for his aunt and everything as well. And it's just a really sweet moment whenever you're having a loved one go through situations like this. Of course, it always helps. It's always good to have someone that supports you. And I there are a lot of moments here where we're seeing in this issue where I think there's a lot kind of making it really seem like Betty Brant is going to be Peter's main love interest. I mean, obviously she is currently. So we have this nice little moment as Betty and Peter kind of bond over this, and Peter was recently told that they're going to have to operate on Aunt May. So he's thinking, of course, he's going to need to raise some money and fast. So he tells Betty, he's like, hey, I hope you don't mind if I don't walk you home tonight. I have some things I have to do. And she's kind of thinking to himself, like, he's got something he's hiding. He's got a deep secret. He seems like he's a volcano just ready to erupt. But Spidey is being Spidey. His whole idea here is to get some picks as Spider-Man, and sell Jameson to as much as he, or sell them to Jameson for as much as he can. But it starts to rain, and Peter's immediately thinking to himself, like, oh God, like I'm giving up just because of the rain, like all these different things. But he kind of has to. I mean, he can't really swing around and climb and stuff that well, at least not yet, in the rain. And we have this moment. I think this is a nice attention to detail, where Peter washes and dries his costume, but he doesn't have a washer and or a dryer. Now, I know this takes place in the 60s, but I looked it up, and washers and dryers have existed for a good amount of time. They didn't seem to become commonplace until the 70s, maybe even the 80s. However, they weren't available for someone like people struggling financially like Peter, like the Parkers, at all. So I really like this attention to detail that, of course, he wouldn't have a washer and dryer to do his laundry. He's struggling. It's one of those things that we take so much for granted now. But yeah, I mean, it's such a nice little attention to detail here. But as Peter's tending to his bruised ego and cleaning up his costume, Electro is out making another play, another crime, as he robs a bank that J. Jonah Jameson happens to be at. Now we have this little moment where JJ's really being a dick to the bank teller, and then he's kind of like, does the kind of like, do you know who I am kind of thing, and there's a little kind of nice comeuppance here where Electro, Shocker's later, Electro shows up, and he starts kind of mocking JJ and kind of tormenting him, making a spectacle of him and the teller and everything as he robs everyone blind. And JJ's like, oh, he knows who I am. That means I must know him. My man, you are the owner of like the most famous paper in town. Of course he knows who you are. But JJ, of course, thinks there's only one person who's so confident, so, all these different things. It's Spider-Man. And it's like, come on, man. He even goes to the cops with this, and they're like, yeah, we don't. Do you have any proof that Electro is Spider-Man? And he's like, I don't need proof. I'll get you proof. It's like it can't be anyone but Spider-Man. That should be proof enough. And it's like, yeah, no, dude. Like, you need, you need evidence. You need proof. You need. So of course, JJ puts out a call in his paper for proof that Electro is Spider-Man, and at the same time, Peter is getting the news that the specialist who had to operate on Aunt May charges $1,000. Now that is like chump change today for how much doctors and specialists and all that actually charge, but in any case, Peter, he's like, yeah, it's okay. I'll get the money somehow. And he goes to JJ and he asks him for $1,000, like $1,000 advance. And he asks him, like, what could you possibly need $1,000 for? And he's like, I can't tell you. It's personal, but I really can't tell you. Why he can't tell him, I don't know. Like, why he can't just tell him my aunt was sick and she needed an operation that cost $1,000, or just say it's a medical expense. Like, I don't understand why he couldn't just tell him. But in any case, JJ flies off his rocker and he's like, "Oh, you probably just want to get a new car or something." His whole teenagers, kids these days, that kind of thing, right? He's very much that kind of crotchety character, and yet, and then he kind of goes on a rant and he's like, "Tell you what, if you can prove that Electro is Spider-Man, then I'll get you your $1,000." And Peter's like, hey, wait, that gives me an idea. Why didn't I think about this before? I should capture Electro myself and just take the money. I won't have any of these problems anymore. And we have this little montage, if you will, where he's looking for Electro, he's looking out for him. He sees like a flash of light, and he's like, "Oh, maybe that's him." And it's this guy using a telescope, and then he sees a flash of light in a building. He's like, "Oh, maybe that's him." And it's these repairmen, all these different things. But eventually, he does catch up with the man of the hour. He finds Lightning Boy at a safe, just stealing some money, as he does, because that's his motivation. He's so many of these early Spider-Man villains and such really didn't have that creative motivation, but it is what it is. They're petty criminals doing their thing, right? So Peter is, the two of them are, of course, they get into a fight, as you do. There's actually a moment where Electro mentions that he saw Peter's reflection, and as the two are fighting, he kind of mocks him and mentions, he's like, no one should ever touch me, because as he does, Spidey gets shocked by this like electric energy that Electro just releases, essentially. Now, that's why I mentioned the difference between electrocution and shocking before, because Electro thinks that he's electrocuted Spider-Man, whereas, of course, he didn't. We wouldn't really have much of a continuation of the hero if he did. He wakes up, realizes that Electro's gone, and what he decides to do is something that I didn't even know really that could be done at this time. Well, he says he's going to superimpose pictures together to make it look like Spider-Man and Electro are the same person, because that's what JJ is looking for. However, that's not exactly what happens here. So JJ does write Peter his check for $1,000, and he thinks to himself about how terrible he feels having to fake this in order to get the $1,000, but that he's going to make it up somehow. And all he did was take three images of Spider-Man and Electro and put them like next to each other to make it look like they were the same person, but like it doesn't. It's just that they were in the same area. I mean, we know that's what actually happened, but even looking at it, it's like pictures next to each other that show people are in the same area does not prove they're the same person. Like, what do you, if anything, that proves they're different people. But in any case, you know, Jameson buys it, literally, and he, puts it on the front news and everything, and there you have it. We cut to Electro reading the paper and basically, kind of laughing and monologuing to himself about how if JJ ever wants proof that we're not the same person, he's going to have to wait a long time because, again, he thinks Spider-Man's dead. And he kind of monologues, and we have this flashback which shows us the origin of how he became Electro. He was originally just a regular guy who was a electrician. He worked on the telephone poles, and we see right off the bat that he was just a real stand-up guy, as we see that when a fellow employee was stuck on a line and his life was in danger, Max Dillon basically said, "Yeah, man, I don't do anything for free." He's very much the kind of I don't get out of bed for less than 300 kind of guy. So they decide to pay him just to save his own colleague, his own fellow employee. So we already see right off the bat that he was really just a shitty dude from the beginning. And we also have, and I really like that because we see that, it's not where this power is necessarily corrupting these people, but they're already shitty people. Like we see that with a lot of these villains. And one day when he's working a line on his own, lightning strikes, and somehow it ends up giving him the ability to conduct electricity through himself. He creates this contraption where he's able to basically channel the electricity in his body and create these lightning bolts and stuff that he's able to throw, and just all these other different ways he's able to control electricity and manipulate it as he does. And that catches us up to, well, the present day, if you will. And for some reason, Electro decides it's a good idea to get a bunch of criminals from a nearby prison and just release them to, I don't know, make an army for himself. He wants to like get a bunch of, goons for himself that are gonna work for him, so he thinks, and all that stuff. Now, something that I want to mention about Electro and really all of these villains in general here that we've gone over thus far, a very common criticism of Spider-Man's villains these days is that they're all too personally connected to him. And I understand that criticism as far as a lot of the adaptations go, but we see here, as we've been going through these issues, that's a very modern thing, something that really only exists in the adaptations and doesn't exist elsewhere, like at all. The idea that every villain, there's not a single villain in the early issues of Spider-Man that we've gone through here. There's not a single villain that Spider-Man knew before they became a villain. Like, the idea that they're all personally connected to him just isn't true. Not originally in the comics, at least. In a lot of the adaptations, yes, that does become more of a thing, but originally in the comics, it's not a thing. It's really interesting going back through these early issues and seeing how different all that is. But in any case, of course the police are alerted and everything, and Peter's thinking he's got to get out there as Spidey and all that, but he's got to take care of Aunt May as well. And we have this really sweet moment where, as she's about to go into the operating room, Betty is there once again. And Betty is, she's there just to be with Peter, just to console him and support him through this. And there's this really, really nice panel here where the narration even explains that they need no words. All they do here is just sit with each other, and everything is understood. And man, this is really sweet. Like this is a really, really sweet moment. because again, it's true. Like you have that support from a loved one, and it's really all you need in these kind of situations. But as well, it's so this is the kind of thing that I think really does set up the potential for a legitimate romance really blossoming between Peter Peter and Betty here. We know today, of course, that it doesn't last, but there are a lot of moments here in these early issues that make it seem like, yeah, this is how it's going to be. And some people might get kind of annoyed at that. Some people kind of are annoyed, I think, at how the relationships are handled in Spider-Man as well. But I really like that he doesn't just get with his first love. He doesn't get with his first crush. He doesn't, none of that. Like, those aren't his end game. Because in real life, most of the time, you're not going to end up with your first partner or your first crush or anything. And the fact that Peter has this journey through romance, as he has this journey through so many other aspects of life, it's just some of those things that makes him such a relatable character. Meanwhile, Electro is causing havoc and trying to get his goons together. Whereas some of them are like, "Nah, forget you, Electro. We're just gonna go do our things." Like, "Whoa, I have a plan. I have a plan." And as soon as they get out, the cops immediately take them down. But from that moment, we have yet another very sweet, soft moment where they find that the operation was a success, and we have Peter just relieved that Aunt May is fine and well and everything is okay. Now, when I said before how I really dislike this whole, kind of just stringing the audience along like this and kind of holding this idea that Aunt May might die over our heads, I'm okay with it here because this is the first time it happens, and this is the first time we have this kind of situation, and it's okay because this isn't them holding it over and constantly faking us out and that kind of thing. This is the first time, and it's okay in my book. But with Aunt May taken care of and everything, Peter is free to suit up as Spidey and go and do his Spider-Man thing. Betty pleads with him. She's like, "Tell me you're not going to go to that prison breakout to, take pictures of Spider-Man and Electro and the whole thing." He's like, "I have to. This is my job." And she's like, "This is what I was worried about. You're obsessed with like the thrill of it, like all these different things." And they're both kind of not really understanding each other here. He's like, I gotta go. I gotta go do this." And of course, he does. He makes a pit stop to gather some materials. And what we find as he enters the prison to set things right, he puts on these rubber boots and gloves so that he has a fighting chance against Electro. And I like this concept. I really like this idea. Look, I have no problem with Peter being resourceful and doing these things. Like, I think this is great, and being creative with these, all of these different things. I just don't like things like the webbing, man. Which, by the way, very different from the last issue, how we saw that stuff all the time. We're not seeing that much here at all, and I really like it. It's one of the reasons that I actually quite enjoy this issue, as you're probably noticing already, and will continue as we go on here. So Spidey's finally able to actually land a punch on Electro, and the two, of course, fight for a while, as you do, and Peter is able to, of course, take down the goons as well. Kind of put get them back to the cops, or everybody puts them back in their cell. Now, one of them has a gun, which Spidey kicks out of their, out of which Spidey kicks out of their hand, and this is when he actually sends them back to the cops, but he comes face to face with Electro once again, who now has the gun and the electricity as he's ready to shoot him. Now, we have a moment similar to one that I had mentioned before in issue 4, where Spidey is, fighting Sandman, where they have this sand in a bucket of sand labeled fire. So again, I'm thinking that like before fire hydrants, people would use sand to put out fire. That's the only thing that I can think as to why there's buckets of sand in places labeled fire. Like I don't get it. But Spidey kicks his sand at Electro, which kind of blinds him for the moment as Spidey's then able to web up his gun, and Electro gets so mad and rips these cables out of the wall that he then uses like whips to try and kill Spider-Man with quickly. Now, luckily, because he's got his rubber gloves, he's able to kind of push back against them and not be damaged by them and everything. But Spidey backs up into a hose, which he's then able to use to fire at Electro and short circuit him. And I have to talk about this art on Spider-Man real quick here. What in the back assword shit is this? I mean, look at this. We have his torso blue, his arms, one arm is blue, one arm is red, a quarter of his left arm is blue. He doesn't, oh no, those are his gloves. I thought that it was going to be like, he doesn't have his gloves on, but no, those are his rubber boots and gloves. But like, what the hell is this? Like, what is this coloring they did? What is this, Steve Ditko? Come on, man. Like, what is this? No, it's all good. It's just something kind of funny to point out. But speaking of funny, Peter tries to take off, he does take off Electro's mask, and he even makes a comment that he doesn't know who this guy is. Because, like I said, he doesn't know who he is. The idea of him having these, sorry, I had to fly. The idea of him having these, like, personal villains all the time was not something that existed at all in the early issues. Back at the Bugle, I'm surprised JJ doesn't break his back with this 180 he's about to do. He starts off ranting and raving to Betty about how he's going to fire Peter and sue him because he found that he found Spider-Man still out there and that he's in fact not Electro and all these different things. And Peter comes in with some new pictures and he tells him, "You're not going to fire me and you're not going to sue me because I've got the best pictures of these two that you could want." And we have this moment here where I love this shot because we have JJ just so desperate. He looks like he's about to snap as he's like, "Well, we can put this picture nonsense behind us, and I'll make sure to pay you top dollar for this and everything. Everything's okay, right, Peter? Right? Because he's just so, he knows those are incredibly good pictures, and he knows how valuable Peter is to him, and all these different things, right? And yet Peter, he's like, "Yeah, sure, we can do that. That'd be great." And he's thinking to himself, "Great, now my conscience is clear. Like we're all set. Like we got everything sorted here. This is great." Now, I want to point out as well here, Betty, as Peter leaves JJ's office, and Betty's like, "Oh, so you went without, even though I, told you not to." He's like, "Sorry, I had to." And Betty mentions how, I never told you why I left high school last year and took a job. There was someone I knew who, and they reminded me of you, but I don't want to be hurt again. And Peter, he kind of snaps at this. He's like, "All right, forget it. I get it. I'm not this great guy that you're still pining for, all these different things." He thinks he's hung up on an ex. Well, that's not really the situation. We do see, as well as things are wrapping up here, that, Aunt May is all well and good. And as Peter is leaving the hospital one last time here, Betty shows up again, and the two of them begin, really discussing their relationship and things of that nature. And there's this nice little moment here where, as the narrator states, as we have this final image of Peter and Betty Brant walking through the night streets, and the narrator states that this is the beginning of love. The two are beginning to talk and fall in love with each other. And aside from the fact that Peter's apparently blonde now on this last shot, I really like this. I really like this ending, and I really like this story overall. That is the end of the Amazing Spider-Man issue number 9, and I really enjoyed this. I said I didn't like issue 8 much at all, and I really didn't. Issue 9 just turned it all around. It was incredible. For one, I want to start off with a very shallow thing. There was none of the web parachutes or web hammers or any shit like that. It was just good old regular, he's using his webs like Spider-Man would. We don't have any of the kind of really hokey stuff I don't like. The stakes, again, I really don't like how they keep redoing the whole Aunt May's gonna die thing, but for this time, this was really good. They really do seem to be setting up Betty Brant here as, Peter's endgame. Throughout all this here, I really like the desperation we see with Peter trying to take care of Aunt May and everything, as well as the kind of slight commentary on how we saw Peter being willing to stoop to his lowest and give fraudulent images to, I mean, not fraudulent images, but the way they were laid out and everything, and try to paint a narrative that wasn't even true in order to make a quick buck because he needed it so desperately. Now, that's something where this same kind of thing has been, properly commented on in whole pieces of media like like Breaking Bad, and he's not doing anything nearly as crazy as that, but you have those kind of beginnings where you see how this desperation of things like trying to pay bills for a loved one really can set somebody on a life of, we'll say, making money dishonestly, because not necessarily criminal activity, but at least dishonest. And yes, it's a little bit contrived how everything wraps up, but this was a really good issue overall. This was just, I think this was just a really fantastic issue. I quite liked it, and again, I really do like that ending as well with Peter. Peter and Betty just, we have the really quiet moment where she's just supporting him, in the hospital, and we have the really sweet moment where they're just talking. They're walking and talking on the night streets, if you will. I like this a lot, and I do want to call attention to something as well. There's that line where she says, I dropped out of high school. I mentioned before about how I understand the age difference between the two of them is very problematic. I really do think you could still do this story. You could still adapt this and include Betty as like his first real love interest. You could do that and just make her like closer to his age, because she even said she dropped out of high school. There's no reason why she should be like in her mid-20s, as I think she is in these early issues here. There's no reason for that. But yeah, no, like I said, I really did like this overall. I like how this petty kind of a loser villain of Electro is still important to this story overall. I mean, he really was just kind of a dude who was only looking out for number one, and he's kind of an example of what Peter could have become if he didn't turn around and decide to become a better person and use his powers for good. Again, I mentioned before about how there's this common critique these days of Peter's villains being too connected to him, but that just didn't exist for so many of these early characters, and Electro is a great example of that. So in any case, no, I really like this issue. Um, very much enjoyed this. But as always, these are just my thoughts. Let me know what yours are in the comments down below. Subscribe, ring the bell to stay up to date. Leave a like if you like. And if not, I hope you find something to do like. Later, guys. Peace and love.